Crystal Ball College Football. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl. Today, specifically, we're going to talk about the winner of that game, which was Georgia. Obviously, a thriller. The Bulldogs pulled it off 42-41 over Ohio State. Tomorrow, we'll talk a little bit about Ohio State. But today, we're going to try to focus primarily on Georgia, what they did, what I saw, and then, of course, kind of what's next for the Bulldogs, which, of course, is the national championship game against TCU. So, let's start with kind of the negatives here. And listen, I don't want to get too critical of this because I think we all have to understand when a team is given a month to prepare for another team, chances are they're going to have a game plan that to some extent works. Now, in previous college football playoff games, that hasn't necessarily been the case, but in both of these, you could tell that the month of prep really helped the quote-unquote underdog. And that was Ohio State and TCU, of course. And so Georgia, I mean, their defense got scorched. I mean, it was really, really fascinating to watch C.J. Stroud just play his tail off. I'm going to talk about more about him in the next episode, but he played really, really well. And because of that, it was really able to spread out Georgia's defense. You saw Marvin Harrison Jr. just look unstoppable until he got knocked out of the game. Emeka Egbuka, also a great player. He was very tough to stop as well. And all of that is just kind of leading into my thought process about Georgia. And I understand Georgia's got a great defense. They're elite against the run. They get pressure on the quarterback. But in their last two games, and I know the SEC championship game was a blowout. I understand that. But still, in the last two games, they've allowed 850 yards through the air and 7 touchdowns while giving up 63% completion percentage. That's not great. That's not great. That's where teams are attacking them. And we saw it last year. Alabama did it to them in the SEC championship game. We saw LSU able to spread them out. Now, that game was over really early in the game, so you don't want to take too much away from it, but they still had some success throwing the football. And then in this one, C.J. Stroud put up a 94 QBR on this Georgia secondary. It's a problem. And it's something that really kept Ohio State in this game. Now, Ryan Day and their staff did a great job. They schemed for it. But it took a while for Georgia to have an answer. And frankly, if Marvin Harrison doesn't get hurt, I don't know if they ever come up with an answer of truly how to stop Ohio State. Because for the most part, Ohio State did everything that they wanted to do in the passing game. And even late in the game, I mean, C.J. Stroud got them into field goal range. Now, he probably would have liked to have gotten them closer instead of trying to kick a 50-yarder. But in general, not very impressed with the Georgia secondary in this one. But on the ground, very solid. You know, they gave up 119 yards, 3.7 yards per carry. But frankly, it wasn't dominant. You know, this is the first time they've given up 3.7 yards per carry since the beginning of October. So, I mean, even in the run game, they weren't as elite as they have been. Once again, a lot of that is prep. Now, they did have 4 sacks. They had 3 quarterback hurries. They did a nice job of creating pressure, especially in the second half. But once again, I felt like the defense left a lot to be desired. And so I do think you might see a different unit when they play TCU as far as a more motivated unit, a unit that is kind of reverting back to what they were all season long. I find it hard to believe that they're going to have back-to-back performances of playing to this level, which was not up to Kirby Smart's expectations. And so while I understand that there's going to be a lot of people that are saying, you know, Stetson Bennett didn't play well at the beginning of the game, and while that's true, and I believe that, you know, through 3 quarters, he was pretty mediocre. But at the end of the day, the defense gave up 28 points in the first half. That's not something that Georgia typically does. Let's move on to the offense here. So Stetson Bennett did struggle. He struggled significantly through the majority of this game, but in the fourth quarter, he was absolutely nails. And I think that's something to keep an eye on, something to focus on going into the national championship, is just the simple fact that he's been there before. And I don't think anything really shook him. And even though he wasn't playing well, and even though Kirby Smart clearly let him know that he wasn't playing well, Stetson Bennett just kept on grinding, kept on going out, kept on trying to create explosive plays, and that's exactly what he did. he created enough explosive plays. And at the end of the day, that was the difference here, was their explosive plays, their ability to convert on those, and Stetson Bennett being able to stay cool and calm under pressure. You had the Brock Bowers 4th down conversion. You had, a great touchdown pass at the end of the game in which he and A.D. Mitchell connected. But yeah, Stetson Bennett, 398 yards passing, 4 total touchdowns, had 1 interception, decent accuracy-wise, and 11.7 yards per completion is pretty good. So I felt like he really took advantage of the moment, and in the fourth quarter, played great football. And now, yes, I know an Ohio State cornerback fell and they got a free touchdown. I get that, but he still had to make the throw, and he absolutely did that. In the run game, they ran for 5.2 yards per carry. The volume wasn't there because they were trailing. So, take away what you want to from that. I did feel like when they ran it fairly effectively. Now, they did have a 52-yard run by McIntosh, which skews the stats a little bit. But I still felt like there was some momentum there for them to run the football. It was just their 4th game under 140 rushing yards this season. But again, this team to me is built a little bit different than the past Georgia teams because they do rely on Stetson Bennett, and they do have a very good passing game that really feeds off of the fact that they can run play action. They can attack you across the middle of the field with tight ends. They aren't the most explosive at wide receiver, but they're good enough to take the top off the defense and create some explosives in that regard as well. So the run game really sets up the pass game. It did that to an extent in this one, and then the pass game basically just took over in the fourth quarter. So I think in general, if you're a Georgia fan, I think a lot of people are going to sit there and be concerned with how they played. But I think this is what a college football playoff game is all about, right? It's an Ohio State team that didn't have to play in the conference championship game. They've had a ton of time to prepare, basically knowing that if they were going to get into the playoff, they were probably going to be the 4 seed. They were probably going to have to play Georgia. So I think they just had so much time to prepare for the Bulldogs, and I think that showed, truthfully. Like, watching the game, it seemed like Ryan Day had schemed a lot of things that he felt like could take advantage of what Georgia was bringing in the secondary. And then defensively, it felt like Ohio State at times were able to predict what Georgia was going to do. And then the fourth quarter, Georgia flipped that script. And I think the great teams are able to find that counter. They're able to say, okay, this isn't working for us. We need to start doing this. And Georgia did that. And I think that comes from being a championship team last year, coming from a championship culture. And it all worked out. And they found a way to beat a really good Ohio State team. They found a way to get it done. So while I had some concerns, I will also say Georgia finding a way to win when you're coming into this game, the huge favorite when you're coming into this game as the current national champion, you're going for a repeat. That's a tough circumstance. That's a really tough circumstance. So congrats to them for advancing, and now they get to play in the national championship. We will preview that game at the end of the week, but that's it for Georgia. We'll talk about Ohio State tomorrow, but thanks for listening to Crystal Ball College Football.